get started. Welcome to the Search and Standards Documentation presentation by the Cross-App SIG, and I'll be up here talking. There's a Cross-App SIG in here. Oh. Oops. No, I broke it. So I see, sorry, I looked down to fix my computer. 1, 2, 3. I see you back there. All right, so we've got some members of the Cross-App SIG in the room, and some people maybe don't know who we are. That's great as well. There were 2 signed up for this, so I know there's not that many, so some of you must be visitors. All right, so to get us started, I thought we would play a game. So quiz. Yes, all right, awesome. So first question, for FOLIO users out there, that keyword search and newspaper. What do you think? Oh, we've got Y for yes. I like that. Yes. We're going with yes. Any dissenters? Oh, okay. All right. We've got at least 1 person, 2 people, 3 people who think it's not going to. So let's check that out. I did set this up in Snapshot, which was very brave of me. Let's all say that. I did have to fix it because someone already deleted something I made. So we'll see if this actually works. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. Also have this thing I don't know how to do. So I soldier on and oh, go ahead.
Hey Tara, your audio on the Zoom is choppy. Yeah, like so you're coming in and out.
I thought that was cool. Okay. All right, so we've got some stuff on. Maybe someone can. Okay, we'll keep going. So, this question of this pop quiz. That's questions. And newspaper search. And the answer is yes. Got a correct answer. Congratulations. Sorry if you have question. That how do you look up search and newspaper? What do you think? Hands up for yes. Oh, I want to today. So see this issue. It will go to an order that is hopefully pending and still in the system. Let's see. And we go to and so yeah, should zap. Any guesses? It's question mark. You think it's star? Oh no, it's star. Let's get. So who answers that? Star. Useful. Let's see. It's a trick question. Uh-huh. Which one is in research? So the app things about job. So, sign up. Yep. Yes. So, if I type, oh, that's search. SON. I get this song. Interesting. And just to put they're all in there, I'm not tricking you. So I should right? So, so, just to fix the audio.
You know what music plays when you have the please stand by screen? Yeah. Is that the girl from? Yeah. I actually looked this up recently, and the one that's very common is like
Two, testing 1 2, check 1 2, testing 1 2 3.
We're getting notes of the audio.
Okay, much clearer now. That's what we want to hear. Alrighty, we should be good there. And then just double check, make sure that we're looking good here. I'm sure digital headphone. All right, we should be sitting pretty now. My pleasure, not a problem.
Yay! I'm looking to make sure that people can hear me before we lose our newest friend. Can you all hear me? We're looking expectantly towards chat. All good. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Back to our regularly scheduled. So I did just want to start by returning to our section description because it was really hard to formally solve here. And when I tried to rewrite it, I was like, so that section aims to of surfacing search syntax. So some of the problems that we were just looking at was some apps, and it's hard to remember all the time. Some of us are very experienced system. So this is an important goal to actually search syntax and behavior, to understand what the code actually wants, and we need to document how search should function for users for future development, exceptions so that users can be prepared for them. And I just want to say that it's users. Users is highlighted here. Is moving away from the mic better? Someone told me it was worse last time, which is why I'm covering. Is it better if I'm further away?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. I will stand back here like a normal human because I guess that makes it better. How could I possibly speak up more than I currently am? Okay, we'll do our best. The other room is different. It was like you had to speak directly into the mic or they couldn't hear you. I'm so sorry for all of these issues. What I was getting at is that the search documentation that we're creating is useful for people across the project, but who it's for is for users. It's by the users and for the users. So it's not going to be like a technical explanation of how search works under the hood. For development that modifies existing functionality, everything is eventually going to need to be in Jira. However, there also needs to be a central and easy to use resource for future development. And so what we're looking at today is how to create that resource for future development. And this resource is intended to empower SIGs and POs to know how to describe what they want. It is, again, not technical in nature, as you will see. So our learning objectives were to understand what's going on in Folio currently, understanding why it's happening, understanding why it's difficult to solve, and exploring those documentation strategies, which brings us to our agenda. So we're going to talk about the problem, we're going to talk about the barriers, we're going to talk about the solution, but really a solution. We're going to have some discussion, and based on my last session that I was in, that discussion might get pretty wild. We'll see. And then we're going to talk about next steps. I had hoped that we'd be able to do an exercise in here, but that's probably not a great idea with this number of people and a whole bunch of people online. So we're going to skip that. But if you're interested in this topic, just a quick plug for the App Interaction SIG, the Cross App SIG. That's our Slack channel if you are interested. Okay, so let's talk about the problem. A little bit of history here. The problem of searching could be traced back to the very beginning of Folio, I am sure, and every functional area is going to have their own perspective on it. However, we're going to start our history more recently with the cross-app SIG and this particular effort, so sort of where this question came from. In WOLFcon 2023, Laura and Martina ran a cross-app SIG discussion on search consistency across Folio. You can view a recording of this session at that YouTube link. And the discussion at and surrounding that session resulted in a list of search decisions with community consensus. And that's a link to the wiki page that has that on it. It's this page if you've seen it before. It's a big table that says how search should function. It's great and really useful. I refer to it all the time. So after that, the SIG created some umbrella and epic issues in Jira to record the community's desired behavior and try to move those tickets forward. Many of those issues stayed in draft form, or they couldn't be moved forward at all because not enough was known, or it was hard to get buy-in, things like that. The cross-app SIG is a little bit weird in that we rely on other SIGs POs in order to create and move issues forward, and we don't yet have an effective process for organizing that. However, I think the problem is probably a little bit bigger than that. So this year, the cross-app SIG started meeting with POs a couple of times a year. In January, we discussed all of our issues, including search consistency. We took note from that meeting that many of our JIRAs were not things that people could realistically do in their current state. And additionally, one of the things that I learned was that the POs wanted to know how consensus had been reached and sort of how we knew that the decision that had been made was for the whole community and also that it was the best decision in library practices, we might say. So after that discussion, we attempted to do some analysis on some of these consistency issues, specifically about searching, and it was a little harder than I thought it was going to be, unfortunately. So there were a couple of ways in which this was hard. The first is that listing the fields we want to analyze is difficult. That number is 258, 68. That's how many fields we found in Folio. There's a lot of them. The next thing is that it's really hard to say how search should work. So when we started thinking about if we're analyzing if things are consistent, what do we need to look at? Those columns are in the latter half of the alphabet. There's a lot of questions about what makes a wildcard search consistent, right? Can you allow single character wildcards in the middle of a word, for example? Things like that. Even referring to which search you're trying to talk about is really, really hard. So on our wiki page, there are actually screenshots of what we mean when we say courses search, and then all of the fields that are available for the courses search. So this problem got real big real quick. Yikes is basically where I landed with that. If we can't describe what we want, we're never going to be able to submit issues for development or move forward with this project at all. It's hard. So we need to be able to say where the problem is and what the desired behavior is. We also need to be able to say, does everyone affected agree on this change? And is there larger librarianship consensus on this feature? If it's something that other systems have, is there like a system consistent way to do it? You might say, okay, but you made a mountain out of a molehill there. It didn't have to be this hard. And yeah, that's possible that we, and mostly I, made this way more difficult than it has to be. However, it seems to be true that we need more analysis before these issues can move forward or be prioritized. Otherwise, this would already be done, right? Okay. So there's more than one problem here. The problem that Folio users, like end users, want solved is make searching easier and more consistent across Folio. That makes sense. The problem that the cross-app SIG needs to solve first is make it possible to make searching easier and more consistent. And that's kind of where we're stalled. Okay, so I came up with a list of barriers, and I'm sure you will have more. The first barrier, we're going to say it's a technical barrier. As I understand it, the primary barrier to having consistent search behavior is that the user's app is not the inventory app, is not the InReach app, and so on, right? So that's a really simplistic way to describe the problem, but I think it's generally true. In order for searches to be consistent, we need to request that they be consistent, and we need to do that consistently, right? There's no magic way to say, and now we snap our fingers and search works the same way across all of the apps because all of the apps are separate, and that's an important part of Folio, right? Any objections? You can raise your hand if you have objections. Also on Zoom, I guess. The next barrier is communal. Another barrier to having searches being entirely consistent is that we're a community and we need to agree in what ways searches should be done. That is real hard to do. Even when we generally agree, we might disagree on the specifics. Even when we all agree, we might not be able to get the right people to say that they agree. So this is also a community problem. Another barrier is context. So it is actually true that not all searches should be consistent, and in some cases it makes sense that searches function in different ways. We need to know about those exceptions so that we can record them and make them clear to users. That is also part of documentation. Analytical. It turns out it's actually pretty gosh darn difficult to figure out what we mean for apparently straightforward things like we should have wildcards. And there are some hashtags here because people love to bring this back up again. We had some very long and complicated discussions about wildcards at the beginning of this year that reminded me that I am not as smart as I think I am. I put on my little wax wings and took off into the sun and realized that this would have been solved if it was easy already. This kind of analysis is something that requires deep and like extended thought, and that's not always something that's easy to do in 1 or 2 Zoom meetings. I'm going to call this one procedural because I really wanted all these words to sound the same. There are several barriers to getting searches working consistently across the Folio community. Different SIGs in different institutions have different needs, and we're not always sure that we have representation not only of SIGs, but of different types of institutions. So there's a chance that something that's true for an academic library is not true for a special library or a public library. Those are all things that we also need to consider. And then even once we do have consensus, we don't always have a clear path to getting these issues represented in JIRA directly. It's been suggested that what we need to do is create templates. It's been suggested that what we need to do is allow the POs to do this work themselves. There's a lot of possibilities, but I feel like I personally still don't understand what the best path is in every case. And then barriers, question marks. Are there any other barriers anyone wants to bring up before we move on with this presentation? It has to go with the rest of the words, though, to be clear. It's running dry on those. Okay, we will have more discussion, so as you're thinking of why I'm wrong, you can hold on to that for a little bit. So I did want to talk about one possible solution to this documentation problem. So we know that what we want is for a user to be able to easily find how a search field works. Seems reasonable. A user should also be able to easily see whether or not Folio complies with what the community has decided is the standard across the system as a whole. Makes sense? That's what we want? Okay, great. So the easiest, silliest part of this was the thing that hung me up the most, which is literally how do we do it, right? Like, what do we put it on? Like, do we scroll it on a piece of paper? So here are some of the options that were considered. The first is do nothing. I really wanted that to be the answer. It was not. The second was use the wiki, so using tools that we're all familiar with and that we use frequently. I could not find a way to get this type of sort of database information to work on the wiki. It's possible there's something out there. If you have an idea, I would love to hear it. Another possible solution was to use JIRA issues and then just sort of report back out what the problems are. That seemed like it would be messy since we don't know how to get the JIRA issues in there in the first place. We thought maybe we can put it in the docs. That does not seem to be a great solution given the size and complexity of what we want. How would you get like your searches done in there? Piggybacking on an institution service like LibGuides. So not just LibGuides, but I'm sure someone out there has a very cool like SharePoint something or other, one of those Microsoft projects that's supposed to make this easy. Someone probably has something that's designed specifically for this. Maybe we could use it. Wouldn't be part of the community. Probably also not a great idea. Creating web extensions seems fun, but I have no idea how to do that. Literally put it in Folio, also probably a non-starter. Create a document, easy, promising. The last option was create a website. And I chose create a website because that's the one that I knew how to do. So if one of those other ones looks better to you, I would love to talk more about that. So one possible solution to this would be to create a documentation website on GitHub. So for example, the one that was created here is a surprisingly functional AI mockup that was made starting with the prompt that's linked here. The code and data is on GitHub, and we can look at that in a second. Did I include? I did include some screenshots. Okay, we'll look at the website in a second, but basically it has 2 tabs. It will show you search behavior by field and whether or not Folio is compliant field by field. And looking it over, it's kind of like, meh, seems fine. Seems like it gets the job done. I think that it probably addresses most of the major documentation concerns presented to the SIG. Not the coolest website I've ever seen, but it does what it's supposed to do. So just to see this in action, you can select a module, and this is all test data. It is not real. It even says test in the URL. We're all on the same page here. Right, so this is probably incorrect information. So you can choose the module or app. You can choose the field that you want to look at. And once you have done that, you get a report of how it handles wildcard searching, for example. So for wildcard searching, this is what we said is supposed to happen. Wildcard searching should use these characters. A wildcard search can be used to return all results. We can make this as long as we want. There's some helpful tool tips on here. And then for case-sensitive searching, we've got what we want to happen and whether or not it complies with each subcomponent of that. When we look at search standards compliance, we get the same thing kind of in reverse. So for case-sensitive searching, for all of the fields that have been recorded, this is how each field behaves. We've got some fun filters over here because why not? Let's say circulation log. There we go. That's not a fun one. Hold on. Let me find a bigger one. Bigger one, more test data. We can see what complies. If something is kind of in the middle, we can add some helpful text to show why it's getting this yellow. We've got question marks for we haven't gotten there yet, things like that. So this is one way that we could do the type of documentation that I think is being asked for. So on the pros list, I have this idea is pretty easy to use. It's pretty easy to understand and explain. Looks slick, if I do say so myself. And it's better, in the very least, than having to do tests in Folio to figure out how each of these freaking searches works every single time, right? Because one of the comments was, I have it scribbled on a Post-it note next to my desk, right? That sucks. And probably the way you got to the information on the Post-it note was you ran a bunch of searches in your system to find out how it works. And that's time consuming and also not true at every upgrade. So on the cons list, this is a strategy that's held outside of Confluence or any tool that we really reliably use as SIG members. I know it's used by many people in our Folio community. I am not one of those people, and I'm not super familiar with GitHub. There are more barriers to contribute, but they're not insurmountable. It is not central, and therefore it is very likely to get out of date if we are not very, very careful to maintain it. And then my last con is like, well, is it really easier than using a Post-it note? Like, really? Because like, you know which searches you need, so how many people are really going to refer to this? Some other considerations I was thinking of is how much do we really care that the website is perfect if it does most of the job? Who actually gets to contribute to this and how are they like validated? And then also how committed are we to keeping this up to date? Like, is this something we have to review at every flower release if we do it one time? That sounds like a lot of work to me. So for discussion, I would love to hear what your questions are, but my questions are, why is documentation for search features requested? This is very obviously a popular topic, but why? I want to make sure that if we're going to commit to doing some sort of solution that we're actually addressing the why there. And then does the proposed solution meet this need? Those are my questions. Are there any questions in the room? Yes. Oh, sorry, I forgot about the microphone. Or could you possibly? Thank you. We're doing some microphone stuff in the room.
I'm smarter than you, microphone.
Nice. This is Heidi at Webster University. A couple of things. So first, I love the GitHub idea as more of this is an analysis. Let's all talk about this in like within the SIG. However, once it's done-ish, I feel like it really does need to go into the documentation, because that is the primary centralized location that a lot of people use. And I mean, boom, it's right there within Folio. But I think the GitHub idea, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this really needs to be more of a starting point, because isn't the idea to find a consensus and make it more consistent across boards? Like, wasn't that like the starting factor in all of this, that we wanted more consistency where possible?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do that. And
Well, so there's a problem with doing it though, right? Like,
put on those wax wings. I have I have a lot of people who are really annoyed and frustrated because you do something minor and basic every day, and then instead of something that's taking 2 minutes, it's taking 15 minutes because you're constantly going around in circles. Yes, and other people want to talk too.
other people definitely don't want to talk. I saw these two. Yeah,
There's Viv here, and then Viv and you? No? Okay.
okay, there's hands all over the place. Well, I will say it's interesting. We were in the cross-app SIG working group. Sorry, I forgot I'm not in the other cold room. The interesting thing though is like, this is, how do you say this? This is only a problem that exists because both users and inventory exists, right? So it's not that either one is necessarily like bad. It's just that because you have to use both, suddenly we have a problem. And the problem with cross-app SIG issues is that we don't have our own PO. Like we talk directly to the POs, and that's amazing, and that's worked out really well for us. But these individual questions about fixing these things per app have to be addressed by those functional areas. So like, it takes someone who's in RA who's really annoyed about this, making this a priority, even though it may be lower than other issues on the list. But we can't even get there because we can't even submit the JIRA issues. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty new to my position at Smith, and one thing about documentation, it's really great. There's a lot of it, and I have a hard time finding which documentation in the first place between local practices and every other platform. So if there's this, just for that kind of purpose, if there's one centralized place or even GitHub or something, that can be really helpful, because a lot of times I will be looking for the updated documentation. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. I feel like you're on a documentation. Do we have a documentation SIG person in here? There we go. Ah, okay.
If I can jump in with a comment from the first comment about why don't we just do it? I was at the knife fight that particular cross-app SIG turned into, that particular Zoom meeting, because again, like what people needed out of a user search was different than what people needed out of an inventory search or a serial search or whatever. And so it's sort of like, to me, I kept kind of trying to sketch out how things should be different, based on, who is doing the searching. and what it is they're searching for. But you know, we didn't get that far. Also, the as far as the documentation types, we have a lot, and they're at different levels. Well,
Sorry, I posted a screen. This
Yeah.
is the docs that I'm sorry, I keep doing that. I had to learn over there. This is the docs that I think you're referring to. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know Vivian had a question too.
There is a question about the docs.folio.org that Felix has raised online and is wondering what's the reason for not putting this into the docs.folio.org. If you could, no, I'm getting a Slack message right over Felix's comment. Is there a limit to the CMS that this site uses, and that's why you felt like GitHub would be better?
I would personally love for this to be someone else's problem. Staring right at Alyssa. But what I assume is that having like 18 pages that outline every single component of what a wildcard search means. So going back to the let's see if I can get there quickly. Going back to this sheet where we're saying for a search, right? We have, 26 different components to what a wildcard search might mean, that might be a little bit overwhelming on this page here. And maybe there is a smart way to do it, but like, if I logged into this as a user and I went to see how one field works, I don't know that actually is what I would want to see. I would want to be able to see wildcard search works or it doesn't. And then for the individual parts, maybe that is something that's a little bit better to have separated out.
Sure. That
I don't know. Can we have the pretty chart? Does anyone know if we can have the pretty chart?
is done. So maybe
Yeah.
far away from that.
Yes, I'll, without having, as my question.
well,
The question is, can we have the pretty chart? Yeah.
maybe, sure, I don't know. I mean, I can't say much more than maybe, but we do have some flexibility to include visuals and graphics and charts. It's a little bit limited. We do. I'm on the documentation sake. That's why I'm saying this. We do try and keep this pretty simplistic,
Yeah.
as I'm sure most of you have noticed, but there has been a lot of discussion recently about where that line is, and it's come mostly from data import documentation sake, but this is definitely an interesting topic to bring back to them.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that like having everything in one place is definitely the best solution. I don't know if it would be technically possible to make it like have all the bells and whistles that it sounded like people wanted when we talked about this in our SIG, but maybe, again, I'm always inclined to build a mountain where one is not needed. Like maybe this is actually overkill. I would love for that to be the answer.
So I actually now have a number of different points that are more or less related. So I'm going to try to string them together into one coherent whole. As far as your question that you had on the slide, why do people want this? Well, I think that the answer is the question. There are so many different ways of doing searching from app to app to app in Folio that people need a guide for how searching works in the different apps. As far as, well, gosh, why can't we just make searching work the same for all the apps? I mean, that's the user's question. And the reason a user can ask that question is because the search interface looks exactly the same from app to app to app. But as I learned in the last session in the cross-app meeting, that's just a skin, to use a video game term. That's just a skin. You peel back that skin and every app is completely different because they were written by different developers or different teams who had different ideas of the way that things should work. So something as simple as a consistent wildcard character across from app to app to app is actually a significant investment in terms of time and human resources in order to encode that.
For the people on Zoom, Owen is literally hiding behind a pole from me right now.
I actually did have a question. So my question though is, have you, because we've only been live for a year, have you seen that the way searching works changes from flower release to flower release?
That's a great question. Are there any like live libraries in here?
Not users, I don't think.
Users app doesn't?
Inventory has changed. So I probably couldn't document all the way that inventory has changed. There's also been changes in orders for sure. And well, from my personal experience, there have been positive changes. And they have been things that we have wanted and some ways that things have gotten harmonized. And I think there's some other desire, and this is where sometimes in my head what gets murky is, at my institution, I'm on one release. In the SIG, we're talking about another release. Then there's a third release that we're also always talking about. And so I know one of the issues that we had in orders was like if you searched for an order number, it treated it like it stemmed it and stuff. So like you couldn't just say like, hey, I want this number. If it found that number inside a longer number, like let's say if you're at the University of Chicago and you migrated all these continuation orders when you had III from 2010 and they're still active, yay. They're really long numbers. And so they always come up. Like when you search for a number, you should just get that number, right? And so I know that that's a change at some point in time, but I don't know like when or where.
I'm gonna jump in and not just run the microphone for a second. But is that, would you say, Kristen, that it might have something to do with how built out a module is? Because I know, for instance, users has been, the search in users has been pretty consistent all the way through, but it was the first app built. So, do you think maybe it has to do with how built up it is?
All right. So I never go to users, so I feel like I cannot comment on that. What I do feel like is that apps that involve a lot of searching, like inventory, where, maybe you have 13 million records in it. Maybe you're the Library of Congress, and I don't know how many million records you have, but more than probably the rest of us. Search becomes more important in ways that are at least, where we have focused on things. It's less about discovery, but more about like finding stuff that has certain characteristics. And so I think that is probably why that area has evolved. And it could be, and this is my own bias because I'm not an access services person, that users has a more limited range of use cases for why you would want to bring up a person and be able to work within that app than inventory, which probably has an infinite number of use cases. And, the orders app probably is somewhere in between those two.
Yeah, when you mention it like that, it makes me think of, like a user's app would simply, if you ask for a sort of a wildcard search or a suite of users that match a certain criteria, the first thing that would come up is a mode that says random.
Middle. I fully missed the middle of this session, so this might have come up, but I have a feeling it hasn't. I guess this is feedback mostly for documentation more than about search, but at the Library of Congress, and especially on our team, we certainly have people of a range of level of technical expertise, but they're all technical experts. So when we are looking for documentation, we want all of the documentation. Like we want to know the details of how everything works, and we often struggle to find that. So it almost feels like in addition to the docs, somewhere we need like the complete data structure, all search rules, all the granular documentation in one place so that we can, it helps us troubleshoot for most of the time, but we often struggle to find that. So if it's somewhere, let us know. We should probably know by now.
I don't think it is anywhere. I think that's a problem that we've often talked about. So I think, does the session end at 11:50? Okay, all right. So I will let you talk, I swear, but we're going to move on real quick just to make sure we get to the end of this presentation. I would love for that comprehensive documentation to exist. But no one's told me that I'm the person who has to make it yet. So this, however, is something that the Cross App SIG has, for better or worse, decided to own. And so this is the one that I want to make sure that we at least have some sort of path forward on. So my question is really general. How do we move this forward? And the first part of that is, do we actually want to move this forward? Is this work essential to Folio? Is this work that we, as the Cross App SIG, need to own? I keep hearing that the answer is yes, and I do believe that the answer is yes. However, I still really don't want to do this because it's hard, is what this boils down to. And then I did also just want to point out that the work to actually document this is not a blocker for things that we've already gone ahead and put into JIRA. Those things don't need to wait for this work to be done. This work is primarily to help us as users, and anything that's in there is fair game to move forward. I'm not saying we need to stop. So possible next steps, the app interaction SIG could complete some of the painstakingly difficult and annoying analysis that needs to be done by going field by field through the entirety of Folio to gather the data that would make that website work, or the docs work, or whatever other documentation tool we decide to use. And once that has been completed for a few examples, we could establish a process for SIGs or individuals to contribute to our database of search behavior. That seems like the obvious next step if we really are going to do this, which it's looking from your faces like we are. Wow, I'm seeing a lot of nods for that one. Okay. Are there any other sort of important things that we can think of that would be next steps? Sorry,
Well, comment, but it's just that after the implementation SIG meeting yesterday, somebody slacked me and said, probably the entire wiki needs to be overhauled.
well, we're leaving the page.
So it sounds like we should also figure out, this is Kristen again, for those of you online, it sounds like we should also figure out a way for tying this into the docs group, even if we don't know precisely what we want to do now. I mean, another like advantage that I see of this documentation is, I think, the knife fight. Like, some things may start coming out where you're like, you know what? We're doing it the same 85% of the time. Do we need to be doing it differently in this case? Like, is it worth it? Is that difference, does it have a purpose and we're okay with it? Or are we like, you know what? We're gonna request a change so that we can get that consistency. Because I think when I think about where we're going with Folio, one of the things that we can think about in the app interaction group is, how can we make life easier for people who use Folio every day? It's not new functionality necessarily. It's just making it work better. And this is one of those ways where the documentation can be a step that may take it to making it work better, but at least it will make it more explicable as opposed to inexplicable as to what it's doing. And, you know, it will still have to compete with tech debt and with overhauling the underlying structure and with new functionality that's in areas that we don't have right now, but it will be there. And so I do think that, you know, trying to keep that connection with the documentation SIG is going to be important.
I see at least two.
Yeah, just a really quick clarifying question for myself. You mentioned at the beginning, Tara, this is for users. It's for users. But I'm also hearing that it's also to write the JIRA tickets. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that it has dual purpose for both of those things.
Well, so I guess like maybe that wasn't the most clear. So it is for users who are using Folio. It is also for users who are participating in the Folio community who need to understand like what the consistency. Yeah. Okay. And then I saw Susan.
Hi, Susan Kimball from Amherst College. To Caitlin's point, I think that to leverage both what you've built, which could be really useful, but not applicable, not able to get into docs, it seems like docs could point to that from all the places where search is referenced. So it sort of is still available to people that are looking for a deeper dive, but it doesn't have to comply with the strict norms of what has to go into the docs app directly. So just a thought of how to keep it in the place where people are looking for documentation.
And maybe 5 years from now, everything will be perfect and we won't need it anymore.
in a glorious future.
There we go.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that. Sorry, yeah, the dream. Yeah. Yes.
One comment from Martin Schultz says, pointing out inconsistencies may suffice for this group. Let others, the actual users, complain about them. And Owen says, but somehow we need to turn those complaints into action. The cross-app SIG tries to take these painful issues and raise their priority within the community.
Power to the people.
Yeah, no, I was thinking in terms of like what things get documented. It sounds like that we use sort of a tiered approach to how technical and how in the weeds you want to get. So like if you just want to sort of like come up and start using FOLIO, you know, docs.folio.org. And that if you want to know a little bit more, maybe the wiki or GitHub, so that, you know, we can get more into like the really crunchy aspects of it.
Okay, so I'm not gonna hold people up from lunch. I will just say thank you. And I didn't see anyone say absolutely, why are you wasting our time? So it does look like this is a thing we will be following up on. If you are interested in this project more, that is our Slack site. Please come join us for additional meetings. Thank you so much for your time today.